Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Björn Kjellberg. This video is a quick overview of the Haskell package called GDP, which is based on the paper Ghosts of Departed Proofs by Matt Noonan. Let's take a look at how this works. Regard the following procedure. Nth takes an integer and a list and returns the corresponding element in that list. This procedure is not total, however. What happens when you pass an integer out of bounds of the list or when the list is empty? What we can do is change the signature and return a maybe of A and return nothing on invalid arguments. This is fine for most situations, but it requires that the consumer of the procedure always check the result. What if they know beforehand that the arguments are correct? Can we give the consumer the flexibility to prove that the arguments are correct before passing them to the procedure? With GDP, we can claim properties about our values. This signature says that the int named x has a proof such that positive of x holds. We'll go over these parts one by one. The first part is the name x. This is a mechanism that allows us to refer to a value in a proof. Introduction of a name is to be tightly controlled. Take a second to regard the name procedure provided by the GDP package. It is a higher rank procedure which names the argument a as n and lets a consumer use it and refer to it in construction of proofs. There are a few more ways of introducing names that we will look at later. The second part is the positive property. This property has no meaning on its own. We'll take a look at how this is achieved in a moment. We've created a new type wrapping the defn type, which is a unit type provided by GDP. It's not important for this video why we do it this way. You're just as well off by accepting this as part of a recipe. The constructor of the positive property is not exposed to the consumer of this package. In order to prevent anyone from coercing the name in the proof, we give the type argument A the nominal type role. Let's take a look at how the positive property is given meaning. The positive property is given meaning by how the consumer can produce a proof for it. In this case, the procedure prove positive tries to produce a proof when given a named int. X is unnamed, then checked if it is indeed positive. Note that removing a name is always safe to do, and this is okay for consumers of a library to do whenever they want. If X is positive, we return just axiom. Note that axiom can prove anything and is therefore not safe for the consumer to use. If you feel like you need to use axiom to navigate certain situations, you may have, in my opinion, made your requirements too complicated or not given enough alternatives to prove a property. Here's an example of how a consumer might use this. Begin by naming some int, then prove that it's positive. If a proof could be produced, then attach it to x and use it for some purpose. Note that if the proof was computationally expensive to produce, with this type of setup, the value can be reused multiple times without rechecking. With these simple constructs, we've already been given a lot of flexibility and power. Let's take a look at nth again. How can we use GDP to solve the problem we described earlier? We can require proofs that the int named I is not negative and is within bounds of the list named L. It is worth noting that these types have no runtime representations. They hitch a ride on other types and disappear after compilation. I suspect this is where the term ghost proof comes from. Again, these properties are given meaning by exposing procedures to create proofs for them. It should also be noted that this is just one way of describing the preconditions for this procedure. An equivalent requirement would be to swap where the proofs are attached or combine them into one with the logical AND type operator exported by GDP. A property can also be built up of more fundamental proofs. This form has some limitations. For example, we can't name a return value and claim how it relates to the arguments. For example, in nth, it might be useful to attach a proof to the return value claiming that it is a member of the list. In some situations, we might want to preserve this type of knowledge because such properties wouldn't require any checking. They would simply follow from the fact of where the result came from. Another limitation is that we can't use this form to check hard-coded values at compile time. So we introduced the Satisfies construct. This representation is equivalent to using a ghost proof. The difference is that the property implicitly refers to the value it's attached to. With this, we could claim with assert that the return value from nth is a member of the list L. Note that assert, like axiom, can prove anything and is therefore also not safe to expose to consumers of our module. If some procedure that uses this property requires the argument to be in ghost proof form, it can be named and given a ghost proof with the procedure rename. This is the second way to introduce a name. We will look at the third and final way to introduce a name later. Similarly, a named value with a ghost proof can be changed into a value satisfying that proof with the procedure unname. With this new form, as long as the property only refers to the value it's attached to, we are not limited by the scopes of rename or the name procedure. As a nice bonus, this means that we could create a template Haskell version of refine positive, which can be used to check values at compile time. If we try to refine a value that doesn't satisfy the positive property, we get a compilation error. Next, we take a look at the third and final way to introduce a name. This is Tic-Tac-Toe. You perform a move on a board B by passing a tile T that is proven with prove not marked to not already be marked on B. The board B must also not be in a game over state. We let Tic-Tac-Toe check if the game is over, and if it is, it returns some object describing who won or if it was a draw. We don't have to do it this way. We could create a separate procedure to prove a game isn't over, but this is a little bit more interesting. We have no way of ever invoking the Tic-Tac-Toe procedure because we have no way of proving some initial board isn't in a game over state. What we can do is we can create a special name, in this case empty, and assign it to the empty board with the procedure defen. Remember that the constructor of empty is not exposed, so nothing else can be given this name. We then claim axiomatically that the empty board is not in a game over state. No checking required. We already have a way to prove a tile is not checked, but as a bonus, we can claim axiomatically that given any tile, the empty board is not marked by that tile. Again, no checking required. We now have an initial state trivially proven correct and a procedure that, given some correct state, gives the next correct state. This means that by induction, we know that our application only contains correct states and that they were produced correctly. The last thing I will cover is in regards to property checking with libraries like QuickCheck. My experience is that property checking can get difficult when checking moderately complex procedures because you need to produce meaningful test data that take multiple requirements into consideration. For example, let's take a look at Tic-Tac-Toe again. This is how it might look if implemented traditionally. If we want to check that Tic-Tac-Toe correctly rejects tiles that are already marked on the board, we have to produce test data with boards that are marked by some tile, but we also need to ensure that these boards do not contain a game over state because otherwise Tic-Tac-Toe will reject it. If we instead separate the property of boards not being marked, we don't have to take other preconditions into consideration when testing this. A property check of this procedure would only need to check that a tile is not marked and nothing else. It doesn't matter if the test boards are in illegal states, that's not the job of this procedure to prove. So in my opinion, GDP simplifies property testing a lot. I believe GDP allows you to confidently decouple your code to a high degree, so be on the lookout for potential problems of too much decoupling. Also, requiring the consumer to go through ceremony before being allowed to invoke a procedure can get out of hand. I'd say it's better to have too few ghost proofs than too many. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.